He had one bullet left. Use it on the woman who could destroy his empire, or turn it on the assassin he just realized was already behind him. Dante's finger hovered over the trigger. The champagne fountain bubbled between them. Zara's eyes never left his. And he made the one choice a mafia boss should never make. He lowered his weapon. Hey dear friends and family, before this story unfolds, I need you to do something. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever trusted someone you knew could destroy you? Your engagement powers these stories. Hit that subscribe button because what happens in the next 60 seconds will change everything you think you know about love and survival. Let's dive into a story where death and desire are separated by a single heartbeat. The gallery exploded into chaos. Gunfire ripped through the carefully curated silence of the charity gala. Priceless sculptures toppled. Guests in designer gowns and $1,000 suits scattered like startled birds. Men who controlled entire city blocks dove behind marble pillars, suddenly mortal again. Dante Moretti did not run. He stood frozen in the center of the gallery, the concealed Beretta in his hand now aimed at nothing, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had come here to kill her. The plan was surgical: isolate Zara Mitchell during the gala, execute her in the sculpture garden, disappear before her body cooled. Instead, she had just saved his life. The woman he was supposed to murder had thrown herself between him and a Castellano sniper, disarming the hitman with a brutal efficiency that spoke of training Dante's intelligence reports never mentioned. She moved like water, like violence had a choreography only she knew. 3 seconds. The sniper's gun clattered across the marble. The man collapsed, unconscious. And when Zara turned back to face him, blood from a grazed shoulder staining her gold dress, she smiled. Not the smile of someone grateful to be alive. The smile of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. You were going to kill me tonight, Zara said. It wasn't a question. The ballroom was emptying fast. Security was screaming into radios. Someone was crying. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments mid-concerto. But between Dante and Zara, the world had narrowed to just the two of them and the gun still in his hand. Yes, he said. Because lying seemed pointless now. And now? Outside, sirens wailed. His security detail would be here in 90 seconds. The Castellanos would regroup in 5 minutes. The police, the ones not on his payroll, would arrive at 10. Every second they stood here was a second closer to catastrophe. Dante should shoot her anyway. Complete the contract. Protect the family. That's what his father would have done. That's what Marco, his underboss, expected. That's what the Moretti Empire demanded. Instead, he heard himself say the words that would unravel everything. Now we run. He grabbed her wrist. She didn't pull away. The blood from her shoulder was warm against his fingers, and for the first time in 15 years of ruling through fear, Dante Moretti felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Uncertainty. They ran toward the service exit together, leaving behind a room full of witnesses who would spend the rest of their lives trying to explain what they'd seen, the most feared mafia boss in the city choosing a woman marked for death over his own empire. Zara knew 3 things with absolute certainty as they burst through the galleries back in trance into the cold night air. 1. Dante Moretti had been sent to kill her. 2. She had just saved his life, which meant someone else wanted him dead too. 3. The man whose hand was wrapped around her wrist, pulling her into the darkness, was either her only chance at survival or the most beautiful mistake she would ever make. Behind them, the gala descended into pandemonium. Ahead of them, every shadow held a threat. And between them, something infinitely more dangerous than bullets was already taking root. Dante's car was parked in the alley, black and anonymous. He shoved her toward it, his body still positioned between her and the gallery exit, even now protecting her from threats he couldn't see. His hand finally released her wrist to open the passenger door. "Get in," he commanded. Zara looked at him, really looked at him. The slicked back hair now slightly disheveled. The dragon tattoo visible above his collar. The expensive suit torn at the shoulder from their escape. The eyes that had watched her all evening with predatory focus now burning with something far more complicated. She was about to climb into a car with a man who had been contracted to murder her. Every instinct she'd honed over 6 years of survival screamed at her to run the other direction. But Zara had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the only honest one. She got in the car. The safe house smelled like old cigars and expensive regret. Dante locked the door behind them, 3 deadbolts sliding into place with sounds that felt like punctuation marks on a death sentence. The apartment was in the financial district, 14th floor, registered under a shell company that had been dead for 6 years. No one knew about it. Not Marco. Not his brothers. No one. Which meant if he was wrong about her, no one would find his body either. Zara stood in the center of the room, still wearing that gold dress now ruined with blood and gunpowder residue. She hadn't said a word during the 20-minute drive through back alleys and service roads. Hadn't asked where they were going. Hadn't begged for explanations or mercy. She just watched him with those dark, intelligent eyes like she was solving an equation he didn't know he'd written. "Sit," Dante said, nodding toward the single chair in the room. "I'll stand." That wasn't a request. Then make it one. Her voice was silk wrapped around steel. "I just saved your life. Thank you would be appropriate before you start barking orders." Something dangerous coiled in his chest. Most people stuttered around him. Apologized for breathing his air. She stood there like she owned the room, blood dripping down her arm, defiance carved into every angle of her posture. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides. She didn't flinch. "Who are you?" His voice dropped to the register that made grown men confess sins they hadn't committed yet. "And don't tell me you're a security consultant. Security consultants don't move like you move tonight." "Who sent you to kill me?" she countered. "And don't tell me it was business. Men like you don't take contracts personally. But you were watching me for 20 minutes before you made your approach." Dante's jaw tightened. She'd noticed. Of course she'd noticed. "Answer my question first. You're holding all the leverage, Mr. Moetti. The gun. The locked door. The fact that I'm bleeding in your safe house instead of running to the nearest police station. But you're the one who looks nervous." She tilted her head. "Why is that?" Because she was right. Because his hand had been steady when he'd lined up shots on men twice her size, but it had trembled when he'd pointed the Beretta at her temple in the gallery. Because she'd saved him when she should have run, and that made no tactical sense unless... "You knew," he said slowly. "You knew someone was going to hit me tonight." Something flickered across her face. Not quite confirmation. Not quite denial. "I knew someone wanted you dead," she said carefully. "I didn't know it would be the Costillanos. And I definitely didn't know you'd been sent to kill me." She paused. "Marco Santini told you I had evidence against your family, didn't he?" Dante went very still. No one outside his inner circle knew Marco's full name. He kept it buried under layers of aliases and corporate fronts. But this woman, this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere, just dropped it like a grenade in the middle of his safe house. "How do you know that name?" Zara finally smiled, and it was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. "Because Marco Santini murdered my brother. And I've spent 3 years learning everything about the man who gave the order. She met his eyes. Which means I know things about your organization that you don't, Dante. Starting with the fact that Marco has been stealing from you since your father died. And tonight's assassination attempt. That was him too. The room felt smaller suddenly. Ellis. You're lying. Am I? She took a step closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume under the copper tang of blood. Then explain why Marco was the only person who knew your exact location tonight. Explain why the Castellano sniper had access to the private gallery. Explain why. Dante's phone vibrated. A text from Marco, *, did you complete the contract? Confirm immediately. *. He looked at Zara. The blood on her dress. At the certainty in her eyes. And realized that the most dangerous person in this room might not be the woman he'd been sent to kill. It might be the man who'd sent him. Zara pulled a flash drive from inside her bra. Dante's eyes tracked the movement with the focus of a man who'd learned to notice everything or die young. The small silver device looked almost innocent in her palm, barely larger than her thumb. But he'd been in this business long enough to know that the most destructive weapons rarely look dangerous. 3 years of financial records, she said, holding it up like evidence in a trial he hadn't known he was attending. Bank transfers, shell company transactions, shipping manifests. Everything Marco has done in your name while you were busy being the visible threat. You expect me to believe you just happened to compile a dossier on my underboss? I expect you to look at the evidence before you decide I'm lying. She moved toward the laptop on the desk in the corner, and Dante's hand went automatically to his weapon. She noticed but didn't stop. Shoot me if you want. But then you'll never know who's really been running your empire into the ground. She inserted the drive and stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. The gesture should have been submissive. On her, it looked like she was humoring a child. Dante approached the screen slowly, keeping her in his peripheral vision. Trust was for dead men. But curiosity had always been his weakness. The first file opened to a spreadsheet. Transaction dates, account numbers, amounts that made his jaw clench. Shipping containers registered to Moetti front companies, but routed through ports he'd never authorized. Money moving through channels he didn't recognize, all stamped with digital signatures that looked exactly like his own. These are forgeries, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Look at the dates. Zara moved to stand beside him, close enough that her shoulder almost brushed his. August 14th, 2 years ago. You were in Milan negotiating the Terranova truce. September 3rd, 18 months ago. You were in the hospital after the car bombing on 5th Avenue. January 9th, last year. You were at my father's funeral, Dante finished quietly. Every transaction was made when he'd been absent, distracted, or incapacitated. Someone had been waiting for those moments, exploiting them with surgical precision. And the amounts, Jesus Christ, the amounts added up to nearly $40 million over 3 years. What are these shipping manifests for? He clicked through to another file, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. Human trafficking. Zara's voice went flat. Young women from Eastern Europe moved through New York ports and distributed across the eastern seaboard. Your family hasn't touched the business since your grandfather's time. Your father made it a rule, no drugs, no trafficking. Clean money only, or as clean as blood money gets. Dante's hand formed a fist against the desk. His father's last words echoed in memory, * we're criminals, but we're not monsters. The moment you forget the difference is the moment you become something I can't protect. *. Marco had been at that deathbed. Had nodded solemnly when Dante swore to uphold those principles. Had clasped his shoulder like a brother and promised loyalty until death. My brother discovered the operation by accident, Zara continued. He was an accountant, contracted to audit one of your legitimate holdings. Found irregularities in the books that didn't match up with reported income. I started digging. Found the trafficking network buried underneath. She paused, and Dante heard the grief crack through her composure. Marco had him killed 2 days before he could deliver his findings to the FBI. Why didn't you just go to the authorities yourself? Because Marco has half the federal task force on his payroll. I tried the official route. My evidence mysteriously disappeared from the DA's office. The detective assigned to my brother's case died in a suspicious car accident. I realized the only way to stop Marco was to come at him from inside the organization. She looked at him directly. Which meant finding the one person who'd actually care that his empire was being used for something he'd never allow. And you think that's me? I think you lowered your gun when you should have pulled the trigger. I think you ran instead of completing your contract. I think. She hesitated, vulnerability flashing across her features before she locked it down. I think you're not the monster Marco needs you to be. And that makes you dangerous to him. Dante stared at the screen, at the damning evidence of betrayal laid out in columns and rows. Every number was another nail in Marco's coffin. Every transaction was another reason for war. But it was also the truth he'd been avoiding for months, the nagging sense that something was rotting at the heart of his family, the loyalty that felt increasingly hollow, the decisions made in his name that never quite sat right. If I believe you, he said slowly, Marco will know within hours. He has eyes everywhere. Then we have a choice. Zara met his gaze steadily. We trust each other enough to survive the next 72 hours. Or we die separately wondering if the other person was telling the truth. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows. Somewhere in the city, Marco was waiting for confirmation of a kill that would never come. And in this safe house, a Mafia boss and the woman he was supposed to murder stood on opposite sides of an impossible decision. Dante closed the laptop. We go dark, he said. No phones, no contact with the family, no predictable patterns. If Marco's watching, we need to disappear completely. Agreed. And if you're lying to me, if any of this is a setup, you'll kill me. Zara finished his sentence without flinching. I know. But if I'm telling the truth and you don't act, Marco kills us both anyway. At least this way, we have a chance. She extended her hand. Dante looked at it for a long moment, this offering from a woman who had every reason to want him dead, who'd lost her brother to his organization, who'd just entrusted him with evidence that could destroy what remained of his empire or save it. He took her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm warm despite the blood loss. 3 days, he said. We take down Marco in 3 days, or we both disappear. 3 days, Zara agreed. Neither of them mentioned that allies formed in desperation rarely survived past the common enemy. Neither of them acknowledged the way their hands lingered a second too long before letting go. They moved through the city like ghosts haunting their own funeral. Dante had protocols for this, safe houses stacked like insurance policies across 3 boroughs, cash buried in locations only he knew, vehicles registered to names that had never existed. But protocols assumed your enemy was outside the family. When the threat was Marco, every contingency plan became a potential trap. So they improvised. A motel in Queens with hourly rates and a clerk who didn't look up from his phone. Cash only, no names, a room on the 3rd floor with a fire escape and 2 exits. Dante swept for bugs while Zara stood watch at the window, tracking headlights on the street below with the intensity of someone who'd learned surveillance the hard way. Clear, he said finally, holstering his weapon. She nodded but didn't move from the window. The gold dress was gone, replaced by clothes they'd stolen from a 24-hour laundromat, dark jeans, a black hoodie that swallowed her frame. She'd wrapped her wounded shoulder with gauze from a corner drugstore, refusing to let him take her to any doctor who might report a gunshot wound. Stubborn. Reckless. Exactly like him. "You should rest," Dante said, sitting on the edge of the single bed. The mattress protested under his weight. "We will move again in 4 hours. Can't sleep when people are trying to kill me." She finally turned from the window, exhaustion carved into her features. "Old habit. How long have you been running?" 3 years. Since that night Marco's men have been coming to my apartment looking for my brother's files." She touched the scar above her left eyebrow unconsciously, a thin white line he hadn't noticed before. "I was in the shower when they kicked down the door. Barely made it out the bathroom window." Dante thought about that, a woman fleeing into the night with nothing, hunted by the same organization he commanded. The same men who answered to him had been trying to kill her for 3 years, and he'd never known. Never asked the right questions. Never looked past Marco's assurances that threats were being handled. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. Zara laughed, sharp and bitter. "Don't apologize for things you didn't do. Save it for the things you did." She moved away from the window, pacing the narrow space between the bed and the wall. "My brother trusted the system. Believed if he just documented everything perfectly, followed every procedure, justice would happen." She stopped, her back to him. "They put 2 bullets in his head and ruled it suicide. Marco's specialty." Dante's voice went cold. "Make it look like something else. An accident. A robbery. Depression. He's been cleaning up problems that way since before my father died." "Did you know?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "About any of it?" "No." He stood, needing her to see his face when he said it. "But I should have. I was so focused on external threats, the Castellanos, the Russians, the Feds, that I didn't see the rot inside my own house." She turned to face him, and they were suddenly too close in the cramped room. Close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes, the way her pulse beat at her throat, the slight tremor in her hands that she was trying to hide. "My father made me promise something before he died," Dante said quietly. "He said the moment you stop seeing people as people is the moment you become the monster everyone thinks you are." He paused. "I think I've been that monster for a long time. I just didn't realize it until tonight." "You're not a monster." Her voice was softer than he'd heard it. "Monsters don't hesitate. They don't question. They definitely don't run away with the woman they were supposed to kill. Maybe I'm just a different kind of monster. Or maybe you're a man trying to be better than the life you were born into." She reached up, and for a breathless moment, he thought she was going to touch his face. Instead, her fingers went to the dragon tattoo visible above his collar. "What does it mean?" "It was my father's mark. Every head of the family carries it." His skin burned where she touched him. "It's supposed to represent strength, protection. The dragon that guards the treasure." "And what are you guarding, Dante?" The question should have been simple. His family. His empire. His legacy. But standing in this motel room with a woman who should hate him, who'd saved his life twice now, who looked at him like he was something more than the sum of his sins, he didn't have an answer that made sense anymore. "I don't know," he admitted. Her hand was still on his neck, fingers warm against his skin. He could feel his pulse hammering against her palm, betraying the composure he usually wore like armor. She was close enough that he could smell the hotel soap she'd used, see the faint scar on her collarbone, count the individual lashes framing those devastating eyes. "We should get some rest," she whispered, but didn't move away. "Yes." His hand came up of its own accord, fingers brushing the curve of her jaw. The space between them evaporated like morning mist. Her breath ghosted across his lips. His other hand found the small of her back, drawing her closer. She tilted her head up, and he leaned down, and the world narrowed to this moment, this room, this woman who was either salvation or damnation wrapped in human skin. His phone buzzed. They sprang apart like teenagers caught by parents. Dante checked the screen. Marco again. 5th call in 2 hours. The message preview read, asterisk the Castellanos know she's alive. They're coming. Asterisk. We need to go, Dante said, his voice rough. Zara was already moving, grabbing the bag with their supplies. But when she reached the door, she looked back at him with something raw and unguarded in her expression. For what it's worth, she said, I'm glad you hesitated tonight. Then she was gone into the hallway, and Dante stood alone in a room that suddenly felt too empty, wondering when the woman he was supposed to kill had become the only person he trusted to keep him alive. They ended up in a 24-hour diner in Brooklyn, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and the coffee tasted like regret served cold. Dante watched Zara push eggs around her plate, neither of them having slept in 36 hours. The fluorescent lights made her look fragile, which he knew was a lie. She'd disarmed 2 of Marco's men in a parking garage 4 hours ago without breaking a sweat. Tell me about your brother, he said. Her fork stopped moving. For a moment he thought she'd retreat behind that wall of controlled fury she wore so well. Then she set the fork down carefully, like it might shatter. Marcus was the good one, she said. Straight A student, full scholarship to Columbia, believed the system worked if you just played by the rules. A sad smile ghosted across her lips. I was the rebellious one. Got expelled from 2 schools, ran with the wrong crowds. He spent half his childhood bailing me out of trouble. What changed? I grew up. He didn't get the chance. She stared at the cooling eggs. He called me 3 days before he died. Said he'd found something at work, something bad enough that he couldn't ignore it. I told him to walk away, that some battles weren't worth fighting. Her voice cracked. He said that's exactly why they needed to be fought. Because everyone else was too scared. Dante knew how that story ended. Had probably signed off on similar endings without knowing the details, trusting Marco to handle problems quietly. The police report said he jumped from his apartment balcony, Zara continued. 8th floor. But Marcus was terrified of heights. Wouldn't even go on a Ferris wheel. She finally looked at Dante. They made it look like he'd been drinking. Planted an empty vodka bottle. But my brother hadn't touched alcohol since our father died of liver disease. He was religious about it. The diner's TV murmured in the background, some late-night talk show. A truck rumbled past outside. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 2 ghosts sat in booth 7, trading confessions like currency. I was 14, Dante said, surprising himself. He never talked about this. Not to his brothers, not to therapists his mother had tried to force him to see, not to anyone. My father took me to a warehouse in Red Hook. Said it was time I learned what it meant to be a moiety. Zara's attention sharpened, but she didn't interrupt. There was a man tied to a chair. Paolo something. I can't remember his last name, but I remember his face. Dante's hand tightened around his coffee mug. My father put a gun in my hand and told me Paolo had betrayed the family. Stolen money, talked to the feds. Said a man who wouldn't protect his family wasn't a man at all. Did you do it? I threw up first. Then I did it. The words tasted like ash. My father told me I'd hesitated too long, that hesitation gets you killed in this life. Made me watch while he had Paolo's entire family relocated as punishment for my weakness. Said their suffering was my fault for not being strong enough. You were a child. I was a Moetti. In my father's eyes, there was no difference. He met her gaze across the table. I spent the next 20 years proving I wouldn't hesitate again. Built a reputation on being exactly what he wanted, cold, efficient, merciless. The dragon that guards the treasure, no matter what it costs. That's not who you are. How would you know? The question came out sharper than he intended. You've known me for 2 days, and one of those days I was planning to kill you. Because killers don't hesitate in art galleries. Zara leaned forward. Because men who've accepted what they are don't look haunted when they talk about their first murder. Because you could have shot me in that safe house, taken my evidence, and solved all your problems. But you didn't. Maybe I'm just weak. Or maybe you're finally strong enough to choose a different path. She reached across the table, her hand covering his. My brother believed people could change. That's why he fought so hard to expose the trafficking, not because he thought the men running it were monsters, but because he believed they'd forgotten they were human. That if someone just reminded them, showed them what they'd become, they might choose differently. Dante looked at their joined hands, her brown skin against his warmth where he'd only known cold calculation. Marcus sounds like he was too good for this world. He was. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. But he taught me something before he died. He said the world doesn't change because good people fight evil people. It changes when people in the middle, people with power, with choices, decide which side they're going to stand on. The implication hung between them like a challenge. Dante had spent his entire life on one side of a line his father drew in blood. Marco was on that same side, just deeper in the darkness, hidden in shadows Dante had been too proud or too blind to illuminate. But Zara was offering him something else, not redemption, because men like him didn't get redeemed, but maybe a chance to be something other than the monster in his father's mirror. When this is over, he said quietly, when Marco is dealt with and the trafficking network is dismantled, you'll still have evidence against me. Against my entire family. I know. You could destroy everything. I know that too. She squeezed his hand. But I'm starting to think maybe you're not the enemy. Maybe you're just someone who's been fighting the wrong war for so long you forgot what you were fighting for. Outside, dawn was breaking over Brooklyn, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. They sat in that diner booth like two soldiers from opposite sides of a war, holding hands across a table scarred with the initials of people who'd been here before them, who'd made their own choices about who to trust and who to fight. 3 days, Dante said, though it felt like a prayer now instead of a deadline. 3 days, Zara agreed. And for the first time since his father put a gun in his 14-year-old hand, Dante Moetti allowed himself to hope that maybe the sins of the father didn't have to become the fate of the son. The restaurant was the kind of place where wars were negotiated over 7-course meals and treaties were signed in blood disguised as wine. Dante adjusted his cufflinks outside the private entrance, aware of Zara beside him in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, midnight blue silk that transformed her from a woman on the run into someone who belonged in rooms where empires were built and destroyed. He'd bought it 2 hours ago along with the diamond earrings that caught the light when she moved. Last chance to walk away, he said quietly. From what? The 5 families who want me dead, or the man who was supposed to kill me? She checked her lipstick in a compact mirror with steady hands. I stopped having safe options 3 years ago. Inside, the room went silent when they entered. 5 tables, 5 families, decades of bad blood and carefully maintained truces. The Costillanos held the north side, Vincenzo's cold eyes tracking them like a sniper acquiring targets. The D'Angelos commanded the east, old money and older grudges. Because laws brought Russian efficiency and Arctic ruthlessness. The Terranovas were a southern charm wrapped around steel cores. And the Moetis, Dante's own people, watched him with expressions ranging from confusion to outright betrayal. Marco sat at the Moeti table, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Gentlemen," Dante said, his hand settling possessively on the small of Zara's back. "Allow me to introduce Zara Mitchell. My consort." The word detonated like a grenade in a library. Consort. Not girlfriend, not companion, not guest. Consort was old language, the kind that meant something in rooms like this. It meant protection under his name. It meant anyone who touched her answered him. It meant she was no longer just a target, she was family. Which made her the most valuable target in the city. Vincenzo Castellano rose slowly, his son Luca shadowing him like a trained attack dog. "Moetti. We were told you'd eliminated the security consultant who'd been gathering intelligence on our operations. Yet here she stands, wearing your diamonds. Plans changed." Dante pulled out Zara's chair with deliberate courtesy, then sat beside her. "Miss Mitchell has agreed to provide her considerable skills to the Moetti family exclusively. Her previous investigations are now under my protection." "How convenient." Luca Castellano leaned forward, his handsome face twisted into something ugly. "She gathers dirt on all of us, then runs to the biggest monster for protection. What's to stop her from selling us out the moment you bore her?" Zara spoke before Dante could respond, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "What's to stop you from running to Daddy every time someone hurts your feelings, Luca? Yet here you are, pretending to be a player at the big boys' table." The room collectively held its breath. Luca's hand moved toward his weapon. Dante moved faster, his beretta clearing leather and aimed at Luca's forehead before the younger man's fingers touched steel. "Gentlemen," Dante said calmly, gun unwavering. "My consort is under my protection. That protection extends to insults as well as violence. Luca, you will apologize, or we will resolve this the old way." Vincenzo put a hand on his son's shoulder, pressing him back into his seat. "There's no need for bloodshed over a woman's sharp tongue." But his eyes promised future violence. "Though I wonder, Moetti, if you've considered the implications. A man who chooses a stranger over decades of alliance makes his priorities very clear." "Crystal clear," Dante agreed, holstering his weapon. "Which brings us to why we're here. Someone has been operating a trafficking network under the cover of our legitimate businesses. Women, children, moved through our ports and distributed across territories that belong to families in this room." Marco's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This operation violates treaties we've all signed," Dante continued. "It brings heat we can't afford and crosses lines we agreed we wouldn't cross. I propose a joint task force to root out whoever's responsible and shut it down permanently. And if the responsible party is at this table." The Terranova representative, Maria, asked the question everyone was thinking. Then they answered it. Dante's voice went cold. "Regardless of family affiliation." The meeting dissolved into negotiations that lasted 3 hours. Territories were discussed, percentages negotiated, alliances tentatively reformed. Through it all, Zara sat silent but present, her very existence a reminder that Dante had chosen a side, and it wasn't necessarily theirs. When they finally left, Marco cornered them at the door. "That was quite a performance," he said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "But surely you don't expect me to believe this is real? She's playing you, Dante. Using you to survive. Aren't we all using each other to survive?" Dante countered. "Isn't that what family means?" Something dark flickered across Marco's face before he smoothed it away. "Your father would be disappointed. He raised you to be strong, not sentimental." My father's been dead for 2 years. I'm making my own choices now. They left Marco standing in the doorway, and Dante could feel the target on both their backs growing larger with each step. The car was waiting, engine running. Dante's driver knew better than to ask questions. They slid into the back seat, and the partition rose automatically, giving them privacy. That was insane, Zara said, her composed facade finally cracking. You just declared war on 4 families in your own underboss in one dinner. I declared my position. There's a difference. Your position being what, exactly? Suicidal. He turned to face her in the dark car, the city light sliding across her features as they drove. My position being that I'm tired of pretending. Tired of playing games where the rules were written by dead men who never had to live with the consequences. Dante. You were right. In the diner. About choosing sides. He reached for her, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything the room full of criminals had just witnessed. I'm choosing you. Even if it costs me everything. You don't even know me. I know you saved my life when you should have run. I know you've survived 3 years against impossible odds. I know you look at me like I'm a man instead of a monster. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. And I know that for the first time since I was 14 years old, I care about something more than survival. She stared at him, eyes glistening. This is a terrible idea. Probably. We're both going to die. Most likely. Marco will destroy everything you've built. Then we'll build something new. He leaned closer, giving her time to pull away, to tell him this was a mistake, to remember that 3 days ago he'd been sent to murder her. She didn't pull away. When their lips met, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate and claiming and tasted like the inevitability of falling when you'd already jumped. Her hands fisted in his jacket, pulling him closer. His fingers tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss. The world outside the car ceased to exist, no families, no wars, no Marco waiting to destroy them both. Just this. Just them. Just the terrible, beautiful choice to care about someone in a world that punished caring like a cardinal sin. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zara pressed her forehead against his. 3 days, she whispered. 3 days, he agreed. But they both knew the timeline had just accelerated. By morning, everyone would know Dante Moretti had chosen a woman over his empire. And the only question remaining was which would fall first, the man or the kingdom he'd built on bones. The hotel suite overlooked the Hudson, 40 floors of glass and steel separating them from a world that wanted them dead. Dante poured 2 glasses of whiskey while Zara stood at the window, still wearing that midnight blue dress, the city lights reflected in her eyes like stars she'd swallowed whole. They'd barely spoken since the car, the kiss lingering between them like a question neither knew how to answer. We should talk about what happens next, she said, not turning around. Should we? He crossed the room, offering her the glass. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and the electricity from that simple touch made his chest tight. Dante. His name on her lips was half warning, half surrender. Tonight changed everything. You painted a target on both our backs. I know. Marco will move against us now. The Costillanos too. We have maybe 24 hours before. He kissed her, swallowing the rest of her tactical assessment. She made a small sound of surprise that transformed into something else entirely as her free hand found his jacket, pulling him closer. The whiskey glasses hit the floor, expensive amber liquid forgotten as months of tension and 3 days of forced proximity ignited into something neither of them could control. Tell me to stop, he breathed against her lips. Don't you dare. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes, and what he saw there was raw and honest and terrifying. I've spent 3 years surviving. Just once, I want to feel alive. Her zipper whispered down under his fingers. His jacket hit the floor, followed by his shirt, her hands tracing the scars he'd collected like receipts for a life spent in violence. They moved toward the bed in a tangle of desperate touches and shed clothing, learning each other's bodies the way generals learn battlefields, every curve, a strategic position, every gasp intelligence gathered. When they finally came together, it was with the urgency of people who knew tomorrow might never come. She arched beneath him, nails raking down his back, his name a prayer and a curse on her lips. He buried his face in her neck, breathing her in, memorizing the way she felt wrapped around him because men like him didn't get to keep beautiful things. Afterward, they lay tangled in expensive sheets, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. For the first time in years, Dante felt something approaching peace. I could get used to this, Zara murmured. Don't. He kissed her hair. We're not people who get happy endings. Maybe we could be. The window exploded inward. Dante reacted on instinct, rolling them both off the bed as bullets shredded the mattress where they'd been lying seconds before. Glass rained down like deadly snow. The curtains billowed in the sudden wind. Another shot punched through the headboard. Sniper. Zara was already moving, pulling on clothes with military efficiency despite the chaos. Adjacent building, east side. Dante grabbed his weapon from the nightstand, returning fire blindly toward the window to buy them seconds. His mind raced through logistics. This hotel was supposed to be secure. Only 3 people knew they were here, his driver, his head of security, and Marco. His driver was loyal unto death. His head of security had been with the family for 20 years. Which left Marco. We need to move now, he said, pulling on pants and shoving his feet into shoes without bothering with socks. Another bullet carved a line through the wall where his head had been. They ran for the door, keeping low. The hallway was chaos, guests screaming, alarms shrieking, sprinklers activating from the fire suppression system. Dante grabbed Zara's hand and pulled her toward the emergency stairs, away from the elevators that would be death traps. His phone buzzed. A message from Marco, *, heard there was trouble at the riverside. Are you safe, *? Dante's jaw clenched. No one outside his inner circle knew which hotel they'd chosen. He'd made the reservation himself using a shell identity, paid cash, told no one. Except he'd sent Marco the address an hour ago when his underboss had texted asking for an emergency meeting location. The betrayal crystallized into certainty as they burst through the stairwell door, taking stairs 3 at a time. Marco hadn't just ordered the hit on Zara 3 days ago. He'd been orchestrating Dante's downfall for months, maybe years. Every close call, every ambush that almost succeeded, every piece of intelligence that leaked to rival families, Marco's fingerprints were all over it. He knew, Dante said as they hit the ground floor, adrenaline making his voice sharp. Marco knew exactly where we were. I know. Zara checked the lobby before they entered. I've known since the diner. He stopped, staring at her. What? The flash drive I showed you? It wasn't just trafficking records. It was communication logs. Marco's been feeding information to the Costillanos for 18 months. She met his eyes. I didn't tell you because I needed you to see it yourself, to choose to act against him without me forcing the issue. The lobby was emptying fast, guests evacuating in their nightclothes. Sirens wailed in the distance. They had maybe 2 minutes before the police arrived, less before Marco's backup team. We end this tonight, Dante said. No more running. How? Marco has your entire organization. Not all of it. He pulled her toward the parking garage. My father taught me something useful before he died. Never put all your trust in one person. I have people Marco doesn't know about, loyalists who answer only to me. They reached his car, not the one his driver had used, but a nondescript sedan he kept for emergencies. As Dante started the engine, his phone rang. Marco's name flashed on the screen. He answered the speaker. Dante, thank God. I just heard about the attack. Where are you? I'll send security. Save it, Marco. Dante's voice was ice. I know it was you. The trafficking, the embezzling, the hit on Zara. All of it. Silence on the other end. Then Marco laughed, and the sound held no warmth. Took you long enough. I was starting to think you'd die stupid. The mask was off now, years of false loyalty discarded. Your father was weak, Dante. All his rules about honor, about lines we don't cross. I've made more money in 2 years than he made in 20. By selling children. By being realistic about what we are. Monsters, remember? Might as well profit from it. Another pause. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to disappear tonight, you and your whore. If you surface again, I'll kill everyone you've ever cared about. Your brothers, your mother, that cousin in Boston. Everyone. Dante looked at Zara, saw his own fury reflected in her eyes. Counteroffer, he said calmly. You have until dawn to get out of my city. After that, I'm coming for you. And Marco? I won't hesitate this time. He ended the call and drove into the night, toward the one place Marco would never think to look, the warehouse in Red Hook where Dante had killed his first man 20 years ago. Where he would kill his last brother, and finally lay his father's ghost to rest. The call came at 3 in the morning. Dante's cousin Tommy was dead, throat cut in his own apartment, and security footage showed Zara entering the building an hour before the body was discovered. Dante watched the video on repeat in his office while his brothers demanded blood. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Zara's distinctive walk, her build, even wearing the same black hoodie she'd had on yesterday. She entered at 11:47 p.m. Emergency services arrived at 1:15 a.m. Tommy's neighbors reported hearing nothing. She played you, his younger brother Nico said, pacing like a caged animal. Used you to get close to the family, then started picking us off. That's not possible. But even as Dante said it, doubt crept in like poison. He'd known her for 4 days. For days against 28 years of family loyalty. Marco stood by the window, his face a mask of concern. I hate to say it, but the evidence is damning. We need to bring her in before this gets worse. They found Zara asleep in the safe house, still exhausted from their escape. She woke to 4 guns pointed at her face and Dante's cold eyes refusing to meet hers. You're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Moetti, he said formally, and something inside him cracked when he saw the betrayal flash across her face. Dante, I was with you last night. The hotel attack, the car ride, we went straight to. The hotel attack was at 10 p.m. Tommy died after midnight. His voice was flat, dead. Where were you between 11 and 1? Here. Sleeping. You left to meet with your security team, remember? Alone. With no witnesses. Marco's voice was sympathetic poison. Dante, I know this is hard, but... Shut up, Marco. Dante finally looked at Zara, really looked at her. She was terrified but not surprised, and that distinction mattered. Take her to the holding cell. No one touches her until I say otherwise. The cell was in the basement of the family compound, concrete and steel that had held enemies for 3 generations. Dante waited until his brothers left before going down alone, their protests echoing in his ears. Zara sat on the metal bench, arms wrapped around herself. When she looked up at him through the bars, her eyes held no tears. Just resignation. "You don't believe me," she said. "I don't know what to believe." He gripped the bars until his knuckles went white. "The footage is real. Tommy's blood is on the knife they found in your bag. A bag you claim you've never seen before. Because I haven't. Dante, think about who benefits from this. Don't." His voice cracked. "Don't try to manipulate me by pointing at Marco again. He's been family since before I was born. My father trusted him with his life. And where did that get your father?" She stood, crossing to the bars until they were inches apart with steel between them. How did a healthy 58-year-old man suddenly die of a heart attack with no history of heart disease? The implication hit him like a physical blow. "You're suggesting Marco killed my father. I'm suggesting you stop asking me to prove my innocence and start asking yourself why the evidence against me is so perfect." Her hand reached through the bars, touching his face. He should pull away. He couldn't. "For days ago, you were sent to kill me. Now your cousin is dead and I'm the convenient suspect. Doesn't that timing feel designed?" It did. God help him, it did. But Tommy was dead. His cousin, who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd stood beside him at his father's funeral, who'd been planning to propose to his girlfriend next month. Dead, with a knife that had Zara's fingerprints on it. "My brother wants me to execute you," Dante said quietly. "Traditional justice for family blood. Quick, clean, no trial." "And what do you want?" He looked at her, this woman who'd saved his life, who'd shown him evidence of betrayal, who'd felt like salvation in a world built on damnation. This woman who might be playing the longest con he'd ever seen. "I want the truth." His hand covered hers through the bars. "I want to believe you. But Zara, if you're lying, if any of this has been manipulation, then you'll kill me." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "But Dante, I need you to hear me. Really hear me. Marco has had days to plan this. He knows how you think, knows your loyalties, knows exactly which pressure points to hit. Your cousin's death isn't about punishing me. It's about isolating you. From what? From anyone who might help you see the truth. Your family is upstairs right now, united in anger. Marco's probably already suggested that my evidence was fabricated, that I've been playing you all along. By tomorrow, everyone you trust will believe I'm guilty." Her voice dropped. "Everyone except you. And that's the choice he's forcing you to make, your family or me." Footsteps echoed on the stairs. Marco's voice called down, "Dante, we need to talk. The Costillanos are asking questions about Tommy. If we don't handle this quickly, they'll see it as a weakness." Zara's eyes held his. "He's right about one thing. You need to choose. But don't choose between me and your family. Choose between the truth and the comfortable lie." 5 minutes, Dante called back to Marco, not breaking eye contact with Zara. "Dante." "I said 5 minutes." Marco's footsteps retreated, slower than they'd descended. "Tell me something," Dante said quietly. "Something only you would know. Something that proves you were here when Tommy died." Zara thought for a moment, then said, "When you left last night, you kissed my forehead and told me to lock the door behind you. I asked why you did that, the kiss, not just leaving. You said it was because your mother used to do that when your father left on business. A blessing for safe return." She paused. "Then you told me you'd never told anyone that before." He had. God, he had. That's not proof. No? It's faith. Her thumb stroked his cheek through the bars. "Which is what you're going to need, because Marco's case against me is circumstantial but convincing. And your family's grief is real. But Dante, if you execute me without investigating, you'll be doing exactly what Marco wants, eliminating the only person who knows the full extent of his crimes." She was right. The tactical part of his brain that had kept him alive for 28 years knew she was right. But the part of him that was still his father's son, that had been raised on family loyalty above all else, that had watched his brothers cry over Tommy's body, that part wanted simple answers. "I wanted justice to be clean and clear." "I can't let you go," he said finally. "Not yet. But I won't execute you either. Not until I've verified every piece of evidence personally." "How long?" 24 hours. She nodded slowly. "Then I'll be here. Waiting. Either for vindication or a bullet." He should leave. Should go upstairs and coordinate with his brothers, should review the security footage again, should behave like the boss his father raised him to be. Instead, he stayed at those bars, his hand in hers, until Marco came back down and he had no choice but to face his family and pretend his heart wasn't being torn in two. The explosion came at dawn. Dante was in the security office reviewing footage frame by frame when the east wing of the compound erupted in flames. The blast threw him against the wall, monitors shattering, alarms shrieking. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard gunfire, not the controlled shots of a targeted hit, but the sustained chaos of an all-out assault. Marco's coup had begun. He grabbed his weapon and ran toward the basement, toward Zara, but the stairwell was already blocked by debris. Smoke filled the corridors. His brothers' voices shouted commands somewhere in the chaos. Then he heard Marco's voice over the compound's PA system, calm and assured. "Dante Moretti is dead. The explosion has eliminated the weak leadership that's plagued this family for too long. Those loyal to me will be rewarded. Those who resist will join him." Except Dante wasn't dead. He made it to the service corridor, a route only family knew, emerging near the chapel where his father's funeral had been held. The building was separate from the main compound, older, built from stone that had survived a century of family wars. Inside, he found Marco standing at the altar with a gun pointed at the chapel doors. "I knew you'd survive," Marco said without turning. "You're like a cockroach. Your father was too. I had to poison him slowly, over months, to make it look natural." So Zara had been right. About everything. Why? Dante kept his weapon ready but didn't fire. Not yet. You had power, money, respect. Why betray everything? Because second place is just first loser. Marco finally turned, his smile cold. "Your father promised me I'd be his successor. Trained me, taught me everything. Then he had sons and suddenly blood mattered more than loyalty. I spent 30 years earning my place, and you inherited it by being born. So you killed him. Framed Zara. Murdered Tommy to turn my family against me. Tommy was weak. Would have figured out the trafficking eventually. Consider it house cleaning." Marco's gun didn't waver. "But I'll admit, the girl was a problem. Too smart, too resourceful. Should have killed her 3 years ago instead of just her brother." The chapel doors exploded inward. Zara came through like an avenging angel, bleeding from a dozen cuts, holding a weapon she must have taken from a guard. She'd escaped the basement somehow, fought her way through Marco's men, and come back. Not to flee. To fight. "Drop it, Marco," she said, her gun trained on him. Now 3 weapons formed a triangle in the sacred space. Dante aimed at Marco. Marco aimed at Dante. Zara aimed at Marco. The mathematics of mutual destruction. Mexican standoff, Marco observed. How dramatic. Though I have to admit, I'm impressed you escaped, Zara. That cell was supposed to be escape-proof. You taught me something 3 years ago, she said, her voice steady despite the blood. When you murdered my brother and I had to run. You taught me that survival isn't about being strong. It's about being willing to do whatever it takes. Then you understand why I did this. Why am I taking what should have been mine? I understand you're a traitor who murdered good people for power you were never entitled to. Entitled? Marco laughed. Says the woman who seduced her way into the family to get revenge. I didn't seduce anyone. Zara's eyes flicked to Dante. I told the truth. Something you've never done. Dante's mind raced through scenarios. If he fired, Marco would fire. If Marco fired, he or Zara died. If Zara fired, Marco might get a shot off before going down. Every option ended in blood. I have a proposal, Zara said suddenly. Marco, you want power and you want to eliminate the evidence against you. I want Dante alive. So here's the deal, I give you the master drive, every copy of evidence I've compiled. You let us walk away. We disappear, you rule the family, everyone wins. Zara, no, Dante started. Shut up, she snapped, not looking at him. Marco, I'm serious. The evidence, all of it, for his life. You get to be king and we stop being your problem. Marco considered this, the gun still aimed at Dante's chest. How do I know you don't have more copies? You don't. But you know that killing us makes me a martyr and him a murdered boss. You'll spend years looking over your shoulder. This way, we're just two people who ran away. No glory, no revenge, just gone. It was smart. It gave Marco what he wanted while removing the immediate threat. Dante could see Marco's mind working through the angles, seeing the logic. Where's the drive? Marco asked. Safe deposit box. The bank opens in 2 hours. We walk out together, I get the drive, you let us leave the city. Marco smiled. Or I kill you both now and torture the location out of whichever one dies second. Then you get nothing, Zara said. I set up a dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 12 hours, everything gets sent to the FBI, the New York Times, and every rival family in the city. Kill me, and you're destroyed within a day. She was bluffing. Dante knew it. Marco probably knew it too. But the seed of doubt was there, what if she wasn't? The standoff stretched. Outside, the compound burned. Marco's men were securing the grounds. In an hour, Dante would be officially dead and Marco would control everything. No deal, Marco said finally. I've spent 3 years hunting you, 2 years planning this coup. I'm not letting you walk away to potentially resurface later. You both die here. In the family chapel. Poetic, really. His finger tightened on the trigger. Dante made his choice. He swung his weapon toward Zara and fired, not at her, but past her, through the stained glass window behind her. The glass exploded, morning light flooding the chapel, blinding Marco for a split second. Zara moved like lightning, diving left as Dante dove right. Marco's shot went wide, hitting the altar. Dante's shot didn't. The bullet caught Marco's center mass, spinning him backward. He hit the marble floor hard, his weapon clattering away. Blood spread across his expensive suit like a dark flower blooming. Dante stood over him, weapon trained on his face, as Zara kicked Marco's gun away. You were right, Dante said quietly, looking down at the man who'd been like an uncle, a mentor, a brother. My father was weak. He believed loyalty meant something. He died because of it. Marco coughed blood, his smile somehow still intact. So did you just prove me right? No? Dante lowered his weapon. I proved that loyalty does mean something. Just not to you. Marco's eyes glazed over, the smile freezing on his face as life left him. The chapel fell silent except for the crackling of flames outside and the distant sirens approaching. Dante looked at Zara, at this woman who'd escaped a locked cell to come back and fight beside him instead of running for her life. Why did you come back? He asked. She moved to him, touching his face with shaking hands. Because you chose to believe me. Because you gave me 24 hours when your family wanted me dead immediately. Because, her voice cracked. Because somewhere in the last 4 days, your life became more important than my revenge. He kissed her then, in the chapel where his father was buried, standing over the body of the man who'd killed him. A kiss that tasted like smoke and blood and something that might have been hope. Outside, his brothers were calling his name, shocked to find him alive. The empire would need rebuilding. Marco's men would need to be rooted out. The trafficking network would need to be dismantled. But for this moment, in the ashes of the old world, Dante Moretti held the woman he'd chosen over everything and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd both survive what came next. 3 months had changed everything and nothing. The Moretti compound had been rebuilt, but the new East Wing held offices instead of armories. Conference rooms instead of interrogation cells. Dante had cleaned the house after Marco's death, removing every lieutenant who'd been complicit in the trafficking network. Some went quietly. Others required persuasion. 2 required burial. The family was smaller now, leaner, but cleaner. And at the center of it, making decisions that would have been unthinkable a year ago, sat Dante and Zara at a table built for equals. She'd transformed the intelligence operation, implementing systems that tracked money flows with the precision of a forensic accountant and the ruthlessness of a woman who'd spent 3 years one step ahead of killers. Half the legitimate businesses were actually legitimate now. The other half were being phased out or restructured. Dante handled what he'd always handled, strategy, negotiations, the careful balance of power that kept the 5 families from open war. But now he had someone who questioned his assumptions, who pushed back when tradition conflicted with intelligence, who reminded him that the old ways had led to Marco's betrayal. They made an effective team. A dangerous one. Tonight's gala was different from the one 3 months ago. This wasn't about charity or appearances. This was the formal announcement that the Moretti family had new leadership, plural. Dante as boss, Zara as his equal partner. Not consort. Not an advisor. Partner. The other families would be watching, judging, looking for weakness. Ready? Dante asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror of their shared penthouse. The apartment overlooked the city he'd spent his life controlling and was now learning to protect instead of rule. Zara emerged from the bedroom in a dress the color of blood, a deliberate choice, a message. Her hair was styled elegantly, diamond earrings catching the light. But it was her eyes that had changed most. 3 months ago, they'd held the wariness of someone always prepared to run. Now they held the certainty of someone who'd found solid ground. As ready as I'll ever be to face a room full of people who want me dead, she said with a slight smile. They wanted you dead. Now they are just intimidated. He crossed to her, his hand settling on her waist. There's a difference. Is there? She straightened his tie unnecessarily, an excuse to touch him. They'd learned each other's languages in the past 3 months, the small gestures that meant more than words, the silences that held understanding instead of suspicion. Yes. Dead people are problems to solve. Intimidating people are assets to manage. You're very romantic when you talk about managing assets. He kissed her, slow and thorough, tasting the lipstick she'd probably have to reapply. I have my moments. The gala was at the same venue where Dante had first stalked her with murder in mind. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of them as they arrived, stepping out of the car together this time. No hiding, no pretending she was just a guest. She wore his ring now, not an engagement ring, but a family signet modified to mark her as his equal in the organization. The room fell silent when they entered, just as it had 3 months ago. But this time, Dante didn't move through the crowd alone. They walked together, a united front, and the crowd parted like water around a ship's bow. Vincenzo Castelliano approached first, his son Luca shadowing him with barely concealed hostility. Moetti. Miss Mitchell. Vincenzo's tone was carefully neutral. Congratulations on your new arrangement. Quite progressive. We prefer effective, Zara said smoothly. The trafficking network has been completely dismantled. The heat from federal investigators has decreased significantly. And our profit margins have actually improved by focusing on legitimate revenue streams. Yes, we've noticed. Vincenzo's eyes were calculating. Though some of us wonder if this new direction makes you soft. Vulnerable. Dante felt Zara's hand tighten almost imperceptibly on his arm, not fear, but restraint. She wanted to respond, but deferred to him. Partnership meant knowing when to lead and when to follow. Vulnerability is thinking power comes from how much blood you're willing to spill, Dante said quietly. Marco thought brutality made him strong. He died in a chapel, betrayed by his own arrogance. And you think what, exactly? That playing house with your security consultant makes you stronger. I think, Dante said, his voice dropping to the register that made men remember why they feared him, that having someone intelligent enough to anticipate threats, ruthless enough to neutralize them, and loyal enough to have my back makes me the most dangerous man in this room. Marco learned that lesson too late. Vincenzo studied them both, then nodded slowly. Time will tell. But I'll admit, the trafficking shutdown was appreciated. That business brought heat none of us needed. He moved away, and others approached, the Terranovas with careful respect, the D'Angelos with barely disguised curiosity, the Kozlovs with the pragmatic acceptance of people who respected results over tradition. Through it all, Dante and Zara moved as one unit, finishing each other's sentences, covering each other's blind spots, presenting a unified front that was more intimidating than any show of force. They are wondering if you're my weakness, Dante murmured as they finally found a moment alone near the champagne fountain where they'd first made eye contact 3 months ago. I heard. Luca asked me directly in the bathroom corridor if I was your Achilles heel. She sipped her champagne. I told him Achilles died because he had one point of vulnerability. You and I have each other's backs. No weak points. What did he say? Nothing. He just looked confused. I don't think he understands the concept of actual partnership. She set down her glass. Though someone else asked me the same question more politely. Whether being with you made you vulnerable. And your answer? She turned to face him fully, and in her eyes, he saw everything they'd survived, the gallery ambush, the safe houses, the basement cell, the chapel showdown. The choice to trust when trust was suicide. The decision to build something new from the ashes of the old. I told them you're not my weakness, she said clearly, loud enough that nearby conversations paused to listen. You're my weapon. The most dangerous one I have. Dante smiled, the real smile that only she ever saw. And you're not my vulnerability. He raised his voice just slightly, making sure the statement carried. You're my choice. Every day, in every decision. The only person in this world I trust without reservation. The music shifted to something slower, more intimate. He offered his hand. May I have this dance? You may. They moved onto the floor, and the crowd gave them space. Partly out of respect. Partly out of self-preservation. But as they swayed together, Dante realized something had fundamentally changed. For the first time since his father put a gun in his 14-year-old hand, he wasn't looking over his shoulder. Wasn't calculating exits and threats and probabilities of survival. He was just here. Present. Dancing with a woman who'd saved his life by making him question everything he thought he knew about loyalty and power and what it meant to be strong. "What are you thinking?" Zara asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "That 3 months ago, I came to this building to kill you. And now? Now I can't imagine surviving without you." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "You know that makes us both incredibly dangerous, right? Two people who have nothing to lose because we've already chosen each other over everything else." "I know." Her smile was sharp and beautiful. "Terrifying, isn't it?" "Absolutely." The song ended, but they stayed on the floor, holding each other while the city lights glittered beyond the windows and the families who'd ruled through fear for generations watched this new partnership and wondered what it meant for the future. Dante didn't have all the answers. Didn't know if what they were building would survive the next year, the next betrayal, the next war. But he knew that for the first time in his life, he was fighting for something instead of just fighting to survive. And beside him, matching him step for step, was a woman who'd been sentenced to death and chose to live anyway. Who'd lost her brother to the same organization she now helped run. Who looked at the wreckage of Dante's empire and saw possibility instead of ruin. "Ready to leave?" he asked. "We've made our statement. One more thing first." Zara led him to the gallery where it had all started, where she'd saved his life and he'd made the choice that changed everything. The same Caravaggio painting hung on the wall, light and shadow frozen in oil and canvas. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing me over the empire your father built?" Dante looked at the painting, then at her. "My father built an empire on blood and called it legacy. We're building something different. Something that might actually last." He touched her face gently. "No? I don't regret it." "Good." She kissed him, soft and sure. "Because I'm not done saving your life yet. And I'm not done being worth saving." They left the gala together, walking past the champagne fountain and the stained glass windows, past the ghosts of who they'd been 3 months ago and into whatever came next. Behind them, the families whispered and plotted and tried to understand this new power dynamic. Ahead of them, the city sprawled in all its beautiful, terrible complexity. And between them, a partnership forged in violence and tempered by trust proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't a man willing to kill for power. It was two people willing to die for each other, and then choosing to live instead.